Welcome to episode 68 of Rebel City Podcast. This week's guest is Graeme Bowman. Graeme has wrote a book called Empire First, Churchill's War Against D-Day. I wanted to get Graeme in just to talk about not only just Winston Churchill and the subject of his book, a wee bit about his past as well, but also why we aren't taught the reality of World War II, World War One, and the British Empire in general. Now, Graeme's an extremely intelligent guy, ridiculously well read, and his book is well researched and a brilliant read. And when it does come out, I think it's coming out sort of June, July time this year, I would absolutely encourage everybody to go and buy it. What really struck me about Graeme was how down to earth he was, even though he's very well educated and had attended Cambridge. But growing up in Greenock, I think, as a working class background has meant that Graeme's managed to keep his feet firmly on the ground. But this is a subject, not only like the mythology that surrounds World War II and how that has informed the sort of baby boomer generation, and now we're still seeing the ramifications of that with Brexit, but also it calls to question our education system and why we aren't sort of taught the truths of the atrocities that former British governments have enacted on other nations around the world, but also, as is demonstrated in Graeme's book, this sort of Britishness, this sort of like not being able to sort of admit that you're wrong. So yeah, I'm just going to let you sit back and enjoy this episode, and also encourage you to keep an eye out for Graeme's book when it comes out. So hello and welcome to another episode of Rebel City Podcast. This week's guest is Graeme Bowman. How's it going, Graeme?
Aye, fine. I nearly get trapped in Greenock yesterday with
the wind and rain.
Yes.
What is this storm called? Storm Dennis?
I don't know. It should definitely be something more menacing than what they've been calling them, though. Like, I don't
Dennis
fear Dennis. I don't fear Dennis, to be honest with you.
So, Graeme, do you want to just? I mean, we're here to talk about the book that you've wrote, Empire First, Churchill's War Against D-Day, which me and Matt have had the pleasure of getting our hands on an advance copy, and we've had a read. Some like really hard hitting, incredible stuff in there. But before we talk about the book, do you want to just tell us a wee bit about yourself? Because I think that the people that listen to your podcast are vast, like sort of petri dish of people. I don't think that's the best way of putting it. But
what a nice comparison.
Yeah, but for people that I mean,
broad audience,
we get people in the Netherlands and America and Canada that listen, and so it would be good just to have a wee introduction.
No, I think a wee bit of bio is always good just to give context. Yeah. So if I was describing myself sociologically, I'd say I'm a sort of working class hybrid. You know, I'm from Greenock, which is I used to call it a grimy little satellite of Glasgow, but 25 miles away.
Yeah.
Working class background, but I was very lucky. I had a very loving, supportive, encouraging family environment, and grew up in the 60s and 70s when there were things like grants, etc.
Yep.
So to cut a long story short, after doing my first degree at Strathclyde University, and then I did a master's in America, I did a PhD at Cambridge, King's College, Cambridge, which was quite an interesting journey. So I'm saying that because, to be honest, I found that rather underwhelming. I mean, it was interesting. It was an underwhelming experience. It was very interesting to see the next generation of Britain's ruling class, you know, face to face.
Yeah.
Okay.
And see what a disappointing lot they were.
Did you get any sort of? I mean, my girlfriend got a scholarship to go to a high-end acting school in London when she was 18, and one of the things that she spoke about was basically like the almost sort of xenophobic attitude that she got towards her.
and other
What,
people
because she was
because she was
Scottish?
Scottish.
All right.
Because there was a lot of sort of middle to upper class people. Because you either get the scholarship to go, or it's going to cost you a couple of $100,000 to go to
Right.
this sort of stage school. And she found that quite a lot of them were kind of in that sort of jocks don't buy their own drinks and
All right, all
moral
that
poor
were
scum.
mean.
Sort of look down the nose at you.
Yeah. No, I can't say I found ever had any experience of that. I mean, the good thing, when I went to Cambridge, I'd done a first degree at Strathclyde, studied in America, I did a master's at a very good Carnegie Mellon University. So
And
it
are
was in
these history?
Pittsburgh.
Was this in history?
Yeah,
or
I
was
did
this-
modern history at Strathclyde. Then I did an MA in history at Carnegie Mellon University. And as the name suggests, it was partly funded by Andrew Carnegie's money
Yeah,
because he was Pittsburgh Steel. And I think, well, I met their academic criteria, but I think the people at the university quite liked the idea we'll have a Scotsman here,
Yeah.
given that we're partly funded by a Scottish steel magnate, etc. You know, because the university's football team was the Carnegie Mellon Tartans,
All right.
and the gymnasium was the Caber Club.
Oh, wow. Right.
So, but the good thing about that is when I went to Cambridge, I'd be in my mid-20s. So when things were a bit sort of freaky and odd, I thought, it's this place that's fucked up. It's not me. You know, if had I gone there straight out of school, I might have found it a bit more overwhelming and intimidating.
Yeah.
But I had a decent idea who I was. As I said, it was a bizarre place. I mean, I'd taken a year out after coming back from America, so I didn't have any. And I tried to look for work, but it was the mid-80s. Cut a long story short, I applied to do a PhD just as a fallback position. And I didn't really have anybody I didn't have any academics. I was living down in London. I didn't have any academics who could say, all right, you know, the Cambridge college structure, all the colleges have a different personality. I didn't know all this. And I ended up, just through freaky, bizarre circumstance and misinformation, at Magdalen College. It's actually spelled Magdalene, but it's pronounced Magdalen, which at the time was maybe the last male-only college in Oxbridge.
Right.
And I was there for 2 terms, and I thought, I'm not staying here. It was racist, sexist, and elitist.
Right.
And the people I wanted to hang about with, i.e. those who wore black and, you know, had funny hair and stuff like that,
Right.
tended to be at King's College,
Okay.
which was a bit more liberal and progressive. You know, Keynes had been there, Salman Rushdie and all that.
Yeah.
So at Easter, I got a transfer to King's College. The guy at King's said, you know, why do you want to leave? And I just said, well, Magdalen's racist, sexist and elitist. And he says, well, fair enough. But we don't want to be seen to be poaching you, so you have to go back to them and get them to let you leave, so you're
You
not
can
poaching
then join.
you. Yeah. So I went back, and I remember speaking to the senior tutor or graduate tutor, whatever it was, and he says, why do you want to leave? And in my naivety, I just said, well, it's racist, sexist and elitist. And he nearly fell off his chair. Now, at the time, they didn't let women in.
Right. So,
So-
that's a sexist check straight
Well,
away.
if you want to be funny about it, you can say, all right, they don't let women in, so they're not discriminating against
Yeah.
them. But later on in the conversation, after him rebutting the suggestion that it was sexist, later on in the conversation he said, well, we don't want to let women in because it'll weaken the strength of the rowing team. Right? So-
Okay.
and I just thought, right, there's no point in having... We're obviously in different planets
And
here.
you're living in
Yeah.
completely different spheres.
There's no point in having any further dialogue. I'll just nod and be polite. And the end of it, he just, all right, you can go.
You can go.
So I did my PhD there and enjoyed it. It was on... Well, basically, when I finished it, I wanted to use a phrase. It was about black studies, black power in California and higher education in the 60s and early 70s. So it had nothing
Okay.
at all to do with World War II. And I wanted to use a title that A, would be kind of grabby and also reflect the assertiveness of the black community at that time. So there was a good phrase on the go then, which was actually used in a speech on one of the campuses I was studying called, somebody had started, one of the Black Panthers, said, up against the wall, motherfucker. So I wanted to call my PhD Up Against the Wall, motherfucker. Colon, Black Studies in Public Higher Ed, California,
Right.
public, the blah, 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 long explanatory title. Now, at that point, I had a really good supervisor, and he just smiled when I said that. He didn't have any problem with it, but he says, Graeme, what I think you should do is write to the degree committee just with that title and see if they'll accept it, rather than submit your whole PhD with that title on it. So I did, and I got this letter back, and it said, we're not accepting this title, and no further correspondence on this issue will be entered into.
My God.
And I thought, that just about sums up, I should have the right to call it what I think is appropriate.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I was going to put asterisk instead of UCK. I wasn't going to be.
Yeah.
But it was, quite a lot of, history books and that start with a quote and then colon the boring
Of
stuff.
course.
And it was a quote used on the most militant, Black and Third World Studies campus, San Francisco State University in 1968. So it was completely relevant. And I thought, well, if I was in a bookshop and running, looking at a shelf or in a library and I saw that, I'd maybe take it down and have a look at it. But that sort of thing isn't important.
It's still
to them.
echoed in, hands up and, or the don't shoot and, they can't breathe, and there's still variations of that in, particularly like Black
And
Lives
actually,
Matter.
the term motherfucker doesn't have the meaning that most people probably assume it has, because it refers to white slave owners raping
Their mums,
the mothers.
I did not know that.
So it's not about incest. It refers to the slave experience.
Okay.
So it's got an extra resonance. If a Black African American uses
that word.
it has a certain, well, at the time, amongst the politically articulate geezers and the Panthers, it had a certain resonance, which has probably got lost in translation a wee bit.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that and other things disinclined me from pursuing an academic career. I mean, I looked at the other people doing PhDs in my sort of field, and I thought, Jesus, if they're going to be my colleagues, I might as well commit suicide. They were so bloody dull. And I'd started writing, in my spare time doing my PhD, I'd started writing a screenplay, which, and it had a good title. It had a Johnny Rotten quote, "You don't need permission for anything." And it was set in a school like the one I went to, and it was over the course of a weekend, kids see their first punk gig, they hear the Sex Pistols for the first time, and when they go back to school on Monday, they say, we're not going as pupils, we're going as a virus to create havoc.
So there's a bit of a punk edge to not just this, but obviously it sounds as though your previous work and your sort of general attitude, I would imagine that, King's College, Cambridge would be, generally speaking, quite a unwelcoming place for somebody with punk sensibilities.
No, there was people wearing this was in the mid to late 80s.
Right.
There was people
wasn't
with
it 74, 75? Well,
it was people with mad hair and a lot of black clothes, gothy, punky, alternative. At the time, Cambridge was at the sort of cutting edge of moving away from the old stuff, and I ended up running there was a bar. It used to run during the vacation, and we made a bit of money, and I gave it to the college as a contribution towards their initiative to go out. They had an initiative to go out and make Cambridge seem more accessible to a wider range of possible applicants. So they were doing a reasonably good job of moving away.
They just didn't want that they didn't want that punk sensibility in your literature, though.
Well, see, that's the thing. The college, it was the history degree committee, the history faculty were the ones that were saying, we're not having that title.
Yeah. Do you think they got the nuance in the title, or do you think it's just purely they didn't want it to offend people, or do you think that they knew the connotations of that word to the subject matter that you were writing about?
Well, I might still have the letter back at my mum's house. They said something along the lines of, we'll only accept descriptive titles only. And I thought that's bogus, because, I've got this controversial intro title, and then below it, it's got all the explanation.
Of course.
But the key phrase was, no further correspondence on this issue will be entered into. So my supervisor was right. I responded to that, but I didn't change the content, but I deliberately chose a really dull, uninspiring, boring title, you know, Rise and Fall of an Educational Experiment, colon, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
So I got the PhD. The only disappointing thing about that is the two idiots that examined me. When you're writing something like a PhD, you get a list of, you know, the protocol, how it should be set out. And the two Muppets, you've got when you get an oral exam, you submit the PhD, you do an oral exam, and I don't mean they look at your teeth. They speak to you, it's a viva. You've got an internal Cambridge University person and an external, you know, as a sort of check. And neither of them had bothered to read the most up-to-date guidelines from the history faculty saying how a PhD should be set out, which came to light during the course of it. Fortunately, I had a copy and I was saying, no, this way of referencing is acceptable. And no, you only put in the bibliography the books you actually quote directly from. Because the Muppet from outside, he obviously read it and checked the bibliography, and he started asking me all these daft questions, like, who was W.E.B. Du Bois, and what journal did Carter Woodson edit? And that's like saying to somebody who's written a PhD in the history, like, who was Hitler and what country was Mussolini from? And I couldn't believe how basic the questions were. And then the penny dropped. I'd read all these books. I knew about Carter Woodson, historically Negro College as they used to be known. I knew about W.E. Du Bois. I'd read his autobiography. I'd been influenced him. I hadn't quoted from them directly in the text. And he'd looked at the bibliography and thought, oh, he doesn't know who these people are. And that's why he was asking me.
Try to catch you out.
So imagine the Wimbledon tennis final and the umpires get using out-of-date rules. Or the World Cup final and they're using the wrong offside rule. You know, because you spend 3 or 4 years writing a PhD.
Preparing for that final.
It's a big thing in your life. It's like being in the final at Wimbledon, and I think it would be incumbent on those who are doing the examining to be up to date with the rules.
Absolutely,
So again, this whole mystique of Cambridge is...
Well, it's still populated by people who make mistakes.
Fallible, frail human beings, and a lot of them...
This goes back to something that we spoke to Mary Black about, where we were... Previous to that episode and speaking to her, you kind of like have this idea of people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson...
politicians in general.
And politicians in general is like almost like infallible. And then when we spoke to her and we were asking her about like what are they actually like, and she's like, it's just... human beings with just as many doubts as everybody else. You get that sort of flavour of like, right, no, I get it a wee bit more. There's an idea out there that every word and every move that a politician makes is calculated, and that it's agenda based. When actually, I think that they're not that fucking smart to start off with, and they don't really get the impact of like, what they're saying.
We're probably going to touch on later on.
My view is you could stand at a Glasgow bus stop and meet people as intelligent as those you'd meet at Cambridge or Oxford. The big difference is CAC, confidence, assets, connections.
Yeah.
That's what people at Cambridge and Oxford and those sort of backgrounds have.
What we've come to sort of refer
tremendous
to as privilege now.
Self-belief. They are, they go to separate schools. They're educated like a separate caste.
Yeah.
They believe they are the masters of the universe.
Absolutely.
And that's the difference. People who don't come from that privileged background can sometimes lack that level of self-belief.
Yeah, the imposter syndrome, etc.
I can't remember if we were talking about this between ourselves in a previous episode, or we were talking to a guest that I had a conversation with a group of mates, and we had been watching the Family on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen this documentary. It's about the Christian right in America and how they've enabled Trump. Basically, that's the narrative that it gets to. And we were just chatting away, and the way that my mates or the friends that were in the room were speaking about these people, and I was like, but like, listen, they think that God has put them where they are. They actually think that capitalism has triumphed over communism because it's God's will, that God put Bush and Obama and Trump. So when you can't argue with people like that when they've got this attitude of this is the will of a higher power. How can you reason with somebody? So you're poor because God wants you to be poor, and I'm rich and privileged because God wants me to be privileged and rich.
I think as
and
well,
it creates this like almost psychopathic sort of viewpoint of how their decisions. So if they have a thought, they think I should do this, then they can back that up rationally in their mind by going, I'm purposefully here to do this job, so I am right always. And it's like, that scares me. That really genuinely scares me.
There's elements of that in obviously the sort of mythology that surrounds Winston Churchill himself. Like, I know that he's widely considered, particularly in amongst English people, as one of the greatest Britons ever. Man of destiny. All these types of things that we've just talked about in the context of privilege. I think a number of them are believed about somebody like Churchill, and I think reading through the book, like, there's definitely elements where you see an actual real person for the first time, or certainly I did a bit of history, didn't do a lot of work, it was more industrial revolution stuff and, spinning jennies and all that kind of carry on, but like, how do we separate, or, is this a consideration for you, how do you separate the real person in Churchill from the mythology as you begin the process of sort of writing this book?
Well, there's two things, a quick way of responding to it. It's a very good point. There's a book published by Robert Rose James. You familiar with the name?
No, I'm just nodding.
He was a Conservative MP, so he's not a radical left-wing maverick. And he wrote a book called Churchill, which covered the period 1900 to 1939, and it's Churchill, A Study in Failure.
Yep.
And I think that's quite appropriate, because had it not been for the cataclysm of 1939 to 45, he'd just be a kind of minor, colourful footnote in history. Because, he screwed up. I don't think any rational analysis leads you to believe that he was a good chancellor. Which, that's a big job. He did it for 5 years.
Yep.
And he pursued policies that just contributed to not only Britain's economic decline and a lot of hunger and unemployment in various places, but he also introduced, there was a policy of military austerity, which was one of the reasons why Britain was not very well prepared to go to war in 1939. There had been 2 decades after the First World War ended, 2 decades of cutting everything to the bone in terms of military spending. And Churchill, if you consider that like 20 years, Churchill was the Chancellor for a quarter of that time, and he cut the Navy's budget, really savagely.
Yep.
So, and also the thing is I've used various quotes because I'm not a big expert, but you can imagine if you've got shipyards or arms factories and they're not getting orders, they lay people off, or, there's no growth. So people, toolmakers and that, or shipwrights go to America or places, or Australia, where there are jobs, where they can progress. People don't invest in research and development. So your military industries, start to run down.
Yep.
And that is one of the reasons why Britain was not in a strong position to begin with to offer a robust challenge to Adolf Hitler in the second half of the 30s.
So he had a fairly sizable impact on, inadvertently on the appeasement that was laid at the feet of, was it Chamberlain?
Chamberlain was the Prime Minister, but, I don't want to overlay, obviously I've put a big emphasis on Churchill because he was the Prime Minister and Minister of Defence during the war. But I'd blame the whole ruling elite clique. Well, just think about it. At the time, Britain was the biggest imperial power in the world, right?
Yep.
So there's a great play by Bertolt Brecht, The Irresistible Rise of Arturo Ui, and he basically uses Chicago gangster, Al Capone, as a way to explain the rise of Hitler and Nazism.
Okay.
So the British Empire is just gangsterism. It's a big version. It's global gangsterism with fancy titles and uniforms to legitimise it. Now, if you've got a gangster empire you need people on the ground to defend your assets against rival gangsters.
Absolutely.
But after the First World War, a lot of the rival gangsters had been beaten, or they weren't threatening us. So the ruling elite, as always, says, right, we'll cut back on expenditure. Now that's a stupid thing, because if you've been a successful global gangster imperialist, there's going to be other people who will want to take what you own. They'll want to take, if you run this bar, a rival gang, a young, hungry, gangster gang like the Nazis will want to take it over the Japanese, or, especially if they see you've not got troops there on the ground to defend it.
Yeah.
So they shot themselves in the foot. We keep getting told, greatest empire in the world, greatest empire, and blah, blah, blah. Where was the defence for it? They cut. If you're going to have all these possessions that you have stolen through military conquest, bullying, coercion, economic strangulation, if you're going to hang on to your ill-gotten gains, you need muscle on the ground.
That's it.
And the muscle atrophied over 2 decades. So when Hitler, Mussolini, the Japanese, military hierarchy come along and think, brilliant, look at all this wonderful territory, and the British aren't really hanging on to it.
Yep.
The more recent equivalent is there have been cutbacks. The Falklands War, Britain had cut back on what it was, its defence posture in the South Atlantic.
Yeah.
So that sends out a signal to other unprincipled, greedy gangster shits. Here's all this great stuff for the taking.
Yep, and the guy's there all week.
So, as Chancellor of the Exchequer for 5 years, who was a great architect or a contributor or a continuer of military austerity, Churchill has got to carry the can. You can't be exempted for that.
Was it
from that
arrogance, or was it just took their eye off the ball? Or?
Well, it was. There is a wee section. America withdrew into itself largely, as long as it had sort of dominance over, North and South America and the Pacific. It's very lucky. It's sort of like us. It's an island or a country that dominates a continent, and it's got big oceans on both sides. So it sort of withdrew into isolationism. Germany was defeated. The Kaiser was exiled, etc., etc., and they had the Versailles Treaty, which limited the number of submarines, the size of the army.
Yeah. So they just felt like there was no threat.
Yeah, and there was some validity in that for a while. In Russia, the former Russian Empire, it was preoccupied with some of its own domestic issues. After a while, the idea of exporting the revolution get replaced with socialism in one country, and they'd been a big rival of ours in the sort of Middle East.
Yep.
They were always looking at India. Can we get in there? And the nexus for that was the Northwest Frontier, which is basically Afghanistan, Pakistan. So some of our imperial rivals were off the scene for a while.
Yeah.
So it was maybe justified for a few years, but then things began to change, and the Germans and, as often happens, although Germany and the Soviet Union started collaborating on, the Germans started developing some of their early, tank warfare things on Soviet territory. They didn't do it in Germany, they were doing it overseas.
Okay.
And there was the British
were tank territory, but into that
I
think you reference in the book that sort of area of land, it was just perfect for tanks because it was all sort of
it was all
flat.
And they could do it away from prying eyes and sort of keep up to speed with some new interesting developments. So I just think it's a dangerous thing. If you're king gangster, you've got to accept there's all and it always happens, you've got big bands that are the stadium headliners for years, and then the next generation comes up and they want to knock you off your pedestal.
Absolutely.
So the Japanese, the Mussolini, Hitler, and the Japanese leadership wanted what Britain had. It's just gangsterism. That's at the end of the day.
Do you think that's why there's a outright refusal now to cut military spending in America, and why people like Sanders is such a big threat to potentially is it? I don't know if it's if you could I could quite see them thinking along this way, because it's too moral based that they would be afraid of another huge world war if somebody like Bernie Sanders get in control and cut their military spend in half, let's just say, would it lead to the rise of another rival? Or is there anybody to rival America on like the sort of military front anymore?
Well, as a
Going off topic a
historical
wee bit.
fact, yeah, one of the great virtues of being a history historian is it exempts you from talking about things which are actually happening here now. But I would say two things, and just to echo, when Dwight Eisenhower was stepping down from the presidency, one of the things he said in his farewell speech was, beware the military-industrial complex.
Absolutely.
There's such, all those big arms firms have lobbyists, that they're interwoven with the political elite there. It's a big business.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's the biggest business on the planet, I think. It's one of them.
The modern American economy is tied to the military-industrial complex in a way that we've never seen since, probably World War II, when America ramped up its military production in the wake of Pearl Harbor. I mean, it's the cornerstone of their entire economy, and if they were to reduce it, not only would you see maybe some of the impacts that you've seen during that military austerity under Churchill, but like the knock-on effect for the wider economy in America would be catastrophic.
They could invest all the money that goes into the military into environmental things, green energy, and retooling the economy to be more mindful of its environmental impact. The other thing that's going to make the next few years kind of interesting and possibly very fraught is the fact that there's serious competition out there, in the form of, for example, China. And, increasingly India is going to be quite a strong player.
Definitely.
So, the 20th century is sometimes thought of as the American century. Who's going to be the dominant figure. I think I'm some sort of, again, I don't want to get involved in any clumsy historical analogies, but, it's like the Roman Empire, get into decline, and they're trying all sorts of remedies to try and maintain their hegemony. The Romans were threatened by various tribal things coming in from Eastern Europe and the steppes, and etc. So I think they're trying increasingly bizarre things like Trump to maintain their position. And for 2 or 3 decades, people growing up in America, it always used to be the next generation will have it better. That's gone. People are in many ways worse off than their parents.
Absolutely.
The parents had the opportunity to hope for things getting better. Now people can't often afford mortgages and stuff.
Definitely.
So there's a great anxiety in America. I think
in the developed world in general, feeling this great anxiety.
Yeah, and I suppose there must be, the message that's going out that's obviously very appealing to young people from people like Greta Thunberg, and that's a challenge to the capitalist, that system that's been entrenched for such a long while. There's going to have to be a reckoning at some point. So they're very nervous and anxious, and some people are just very profoundly conservative, where, small c, and don't want to embrace any change. And if an ideologue or a demagogue comes along and says, see all the problems we're having, it's the outsiders, it's the Jews, it's the black people, it's people with different religious beliefs, it's the foreigner, it's the European. It takes attention away from the fact that, blaming the bankers for the 2008 crash. That's where the problem lies.
Previous administrations for war crimes.
And similarly, with the Great Depression in the 30s, if you're telling generally, it's the Jews, then people aren't looking at global capitalism and banks.
This is one of the kind of quite sort of, again, you might want to avoid these clumsy historical comparisons, but like the rise of fascism in the 30s in Germany, again, that othering of people, whether it be Jews or Romani people or, disabled, gays, whatever it was, everybody who wasn't of that Aryan sort of disposition was at risk at some point or another of being, in the sights. Now, we see some of that coming through in modern day with guys like Trump and stuff like that, the rise of, the sort of far-right nationalism and stuff. Now, at the minute, I don't see a lot of, as we say, a lot of care amongst other political. There's a lot of like sass thrown his way and a bit of side eye, and people kind of like, on the world stage dismiss him a lot and, kind of try and keep him at arm's length. But that's not really effective because it still allows him to go and do whatever the racist bullshit that is that he's doing with he's locking kids up in cages and all that other nonsense now. Like, when we take that back to, like, Hitler's time, people did moan and people did threaten him and people did, again, try and appease and stuff like that. Like, but somebody like Winston Churchill, did he actually, like, give a fuck about fascism? Was it purely about the protection of the empire? I mean, had as we said off mic, had Germany actually went, look, Britain, stay out of our way and we'll stay out of yours, do you think we would have been involved to the same extent?
Well, historically, what has always suited Britain, throughout the 18th, 19th century, etc., is some sort of balance of power on the continent. Ideally, let's have Germany and lots of these countries in Europe fighting each other, but none of them been top dog. Because while they are fucking over each other, we can be out in Africa and Asia using our modern rifles and machine guns against people armed with spears in many cases. So I think the challenge that Hitler, I don't think they really gave a screw about being opposed to fascism. It looked like he was going to establish Germany as the dominant power on the continent. And, so they tried to, if he'd stopped his expansionism, with the Sudetenland at the end of 1938.
So what Czechoslovakia?
Yeah, the bit of the Czech Republic that borders Germany, it's got a significant German identifying population.
I think had been taken off of them during the World War One treaties.
So they did a deal over that. I think the deal was like, let's appease them. We've been a bit harsh to the Germans. If we give them a few things back that were taken off them, they'll chill out.
These people are welcoming them in with flags and parades.
And then, so the Sudetenland could, in some ways, be justified because there was a lot of ethnic Germans there. But annexing the rest of Czechoslovakia, that showed that this is a guy who you can't do. He's not a normal person that you can do deals with. And if this continues unchecked, Germany will end up the dominant power on the continent. So that's when they thought, right, we either start standing up to him now, when we've still got a reasonable chance of winning, or we do it in 3 or 4 years' time when he'll be even more powerful and it'll be harder. So that's why, after when Nazi Germany annexed the rest of Czechoslovakia in, spring 1939, that was the point. They said, right, that's it.
There's no deals to be made with this
guy.
No
deals to be made. If things continue in this way, Germany will become the dominant power. And just to get back to the point you were asking there, if Germany does become the dominant power, and obviously Hitler's ambitions lay to the east, so it didn't necessarily in the short term threaten Britain. He was always like, oh, Britain, we'll be pals, we'll be the dominant ones in Europe, you can just have all your empire, we've got no ambitions there. But at the end of the day, imagine the continent dominated by one power and we're just a sweet island off the coast of it, 22 miles away at the shortest point.
The rest of our territories are at the other side.
Australia, thousands of miles away. That is not tenable. And also we trade, we need access. Well, again, with Brexit, all this is changing, but historically, the British could never allow the sort of channel ports to be dominated by hostile power because, we needed into Europe to sell things and get
places like Suez and stuff like that, I would imagine, were probably quite...
Yeah, Suez, well, that's the Eastern Mediterranean.
Sorry.
So, yes, in the short term, a deal could have been done to let Germany be the dominant power in Europe. But the long term, Britain's position would have been very, very vulnerable. A small island against any country dominating the whole of Europe. We'd have been ripe for the plucking at some point.
Do you think that the narrative of anti-fascism and fighting the Hun, and is that just a propaganda tool to get people that don't know any better to go and fight their war for them, rather than it being these people threaten our political power, our economical power, and therefore we need to take care of them. Would a working class person basically go, well, do you know what? Fuck your political power, because I don't give a shit about your power and your money. What do I get for this? So instead, they need to spin it as, and we are ideologically against these people. These people are racist, fascist, whatever it might be. But actually, like the political elite and the elite in Britain don't really give a shit about that. They don't care about political ideology.
You had members of the royal family, again, in recent years, showing pictures for that time where they're marching up and down the gardens of Buckingham Palace, throwing Nazi salutes out and stuff like that. I mean, so there was, and then the one that abdicated again had quite close ties subsequently with like the German Nazis and stuff like that. So I think the political elite definitely did not give a fuck.
Well, if you look at the Spanish Civil War, right?
Yep.
An elected Republican Democratic government violated by a violent, fascist military takeover. Churchill was not very vocal in his condemnation. None of the British ruling elite were particularly vocal in their denunciation of Franco, who obliterated democracy in Spain. What would have happened as long as they didn't mess around with Gibraltar?
Another British territory.
Had they taken over Gibraltar, you could bet your bottom dollar it would be these terrible enemies of democracy. They're they're imprisoning lots of nice people. Then it would have ramped up. We need to defend democracy, etc., etc. So yes, I mean obviously what Hitler and Mussolini in Europe stood for was vile and despicable, and so that was true, but it was also, I think, the main reason for getting involved in the war was to prevent one power become the dominating force.
I kind of see parallels with that. Well, no parallels with that in any sort of like real sense, but with the sort of relationship that the West has with Saudi Arabia. Let's just say that, well, in one hand, if we talk about Syria or if we talk about Iran, it's about like the human rights injustices that happen in these countries as a way of them trying to sell you the idea of invading and overthrowing and dominating these countries. But Saudi Arabia goes unmentioned, where some of the biggest atrocities happen. We still see like women getting treated as second-class citizens, can't drive, people getting beheaded for having affairs and hands cut off for stealing. But I think this is the hypocrisy that people are starting to get a grip of. A certain section of people are starting to get a grip of, where it's like, well, why are you telling me in one hand that we need to go in and fight here, but on the other hand, the same and worse is happening in this country, but you won't? In fact, worse, you're in bed with these people and we're doing deals with these people. And this is where, I suppose,
the message seems to be that it doesn't matter how atrociously you behave, if you can protect or enhance your interests, we're in bed with you.
Well, look at... Again, I'm not a student of this, but I don't think Robert Mugabe was very democratic.
No,
but
absolutely
not. There's not much.
He did win a number of elections by 100%. You know what I mean?
Of course, what am I thinking of? But there's no oil in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
So we don't care about that.
Yeah, yes. We'll let them do what they like.
And maybe the North Korean leadership, North Korean society isn't very democratic, but we'll not get involved there because that might piss off the Chinese.
Are you trying to tell me that the Democratic Republic of North Korea is not a democracy?
I couldn't never have. I've been to South Korea.
Next you'll be telling me Nazis won the socialists. Let's not get into that.
No, I know.
We did a whole podcast
I couldn't possibly comment on what it's like being in North Korea.
Of course. So in terms of, we've kind of like essentially established that, Churchill's desire to push World War II forward was about self-interest, the nation's, self-interest was to be protected. But like, as that war progressed, like, how did Churchill's like imperialism, how did it manifest? Because the book tends to kind of paint the picture that, as I say, D-Day was something that he was not interested in. That there was a number of instances where he probably like made the war longer than it had to be whilst chasing, because I think the impression I got was that he really wanted to try and find a way to use the Russians to essentially win the sort of European frontiers and potentially the Americans in the Pacific, whilst he was left to kind of direct British interests and forces, in aid of the empire. So are there examples where he's maybe hindered the war effort in favour of imperialistic?
The thing is, as the war, once America, the United States, and the Soviet Union get involved, they are much bigger countries than ours, and we depended on American, resources to fight the war. A lot of our tanks, etc., were like Sherman tanks.
Mm-hmm.
So, as the war goes, Britain is kind of limited. There's all this talk about the big three. In reality, it was a big two and a half.
Yeah. Even
the very, very best.
2 and 8.
So Britain was kind of limited. Its influence over grand strategy declined as the war went on. But I think the simplest way to understand what was inspiring Churchill, or where his strategy was wrong, would be to look at a relief map, a physical map of Europe. I mean, firstly, he's on record on a number of occasions saying, I wish my priority would have been to get into the Balkans, the southeastern Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, he said that to like a group of Commonwealth Prime Ministers in May 1944 and at various conferences with these, the Chiefs of Staff, the British Chiefs of Staff, our military hierarchy.
Yeah.
There are multiple times, and they're all documented in the book, where he expressed a strong preference for action in southeastern Europe, and at the same time opposition to landing in northwestern Europe, which the Americans always wanted. Now, if you take that and then look at a map of Europe, now we probably think of the Mediterranean, Italy, Turkey, Greece and all that, a fantastically sunny place. We go there for our holidays. But if you look at a relief map, topographical map, it's all mountains.
Yeah.
That is the last place you want to fight a really well-organised army like the German army. Why on earth would you want to go and fight in a theatre which is hundreds, thousand odd miles away from Germany's industrial heartland, where the Germans will be heavily entrenched? I mean, if we were to start a fight now, I'd rather be at the top of the stairs kicking down at you than reversed.
Absolutely.
So, and also, if you're fighting up hills, it's balmy and lovely in the summer. It's shite in the winter. Fighting up, when there's all these streams that get overflowing, there's snow, there's ice, there's rain, there's mud. And all the Germans have to do is gradually retreat step by step, blow up a few bridges here, well-entrenched machine gun posts, etc. It's the worst. That's where he wanted to fight. Now, why would you want to fight there? What is the benefit? I mean, cui bono, it's Latin, is, who benefits? You have to look at the context of Britain's long-term interest ever since the Suez Canal opened was to be the dominant power in the Eastern Mediterranean, to maintain control of that area for Suez, and then after oil started to be discovered in significant quantities from 1908 onwards in that region, and after the Royal Navy started switching its warships from coal-powered to oil-powered, Britain, if it wanted to continue as an empire, needed to be the dominant power in southeastern Europe. So that's why I would argue there was a major emphasis on Britain getting into these places before the Soviet Union did.
Yeah.
So you could look and say July 1943 is a big turning point. That's when Germany is defeated at the Battle of Kursk. It's obvious, if it hadn't been before, that the Russians are going to advance. Now, that's a double-edged thing for Britain. On the one hand, it means the Nazis will get beaten. But if the Russians move forward, they might gain direct access to the Adriatic and the Aegean.
So we're talking about like the stands, essentially. The
what?
The countries, the Kazakhstans, the Afghanistans. They're going to use that Mediterranean as a sort of pathway towards these countries. Essentially.
More like the Allied Anglo-American forces and forces from other countries did go into Italy. But Churchill also was keen to extend action into the Balkans. They tried to get Turkey involved. I mean, again, these are things that are edited out of a lot of conventional histories because, it takes action, it distracts us, it focuses our attention in areas where they want it to be focused on, the narrative that suits them. But Churchill initiated this campaign in the autumn of 1943 to liberate the Dodecanese Islands in the Aegean from Italian control.
Okay.
And the whole idea of that was so that they could then ferry, tank divisions into Turkey, so that Turkey could then be entreated to join the war and advance west through the Balkans, which would very conveniently ensure that the Russians couldn't get down and get... What Britain wanted was to make sure the Russians, the Soviet Union, did not have direct access to the Eastern Mediterranean. They didn't want any Soviet naval bases in Greece, or they didn't want Bulgaria having direct access to the Aegean. They were petrified. I mean, at the end of the day, Tito, Yugoslavia followed a very independent line after the war. So, but they were scared that, there might be the Soviets establishing a presence in the Adriatic, which just leads
really
into
Churchill
the
was trying to put wheels in motion that would block Russia out of certain parts of Europe, maintain British interests in terms of gas and oil at a time when the Russians were essentially bulldozing through the Nazi army on their behalf.
Yes, and again, I argue, I don't want to get into sort of, some of the great what-ifs of history, but the contrast, I've pointed out that the whole of southern Europe that was Nazi-occupied, with one exception, is all mountains. And contrast that with northern Europe, you've got 1,000 miles of perfectly flat country, from the Urals to the Channel. So... If there hadn't been if there hadn't been an Anglo-American initiative in northwestern Europe, the Red Army could have just advanced straight along this perfectly flat country as the Germans gradually disintegrated until they reached the Channel. So one of the things I sort of speculate, in the latter chapter 28 is, there's a couple of maps there that show that what could have ended up was, instead of Europe being divided, with Eastern Europe under Soviet control in the West, it could have been divided, across the middle, horizontally, with the Soviet Union dominant in not just East Germany, but West Germany, Denmark, Holland, Belgium. Northern Europe, rich, wealthy, industrial, economically advanced Europe, and had Churchill's dumb strategy been pursued, we could have been entrenched in the soft so-called the less economically advanced sections of Europe. But, we might have had easy access to Suez and the Middle East and the Empire, but there would have been T-34 tanks replacing Hitler's panzers at Calais. Hardly a really good outcome. So we should be eternally thankful to people like General George Marshall, the American Army Chief of Staff, and Roosevelt, and even to some extent Stalin himself, who coerced Churchill and Britain into following the correct military strategy to defeat Germany as quickly as possible, which was a landing in Northwest, Overlord, D-Day. The Americans knew that was essential. America joined the war in December 1941. Eisenhower was the leading guy in the American War Plans Division. In early February 1942, he says, we have to land in northwestern Europe. If we land in Normandy or somewhere like that, we're just a couple of 100 miles away from the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland. They'll have to come out and fight. They can't ignore that. We'll defeat them in battle. We'll take over the Ruhr, and they're screwed. They can't continue. Churchill was wanting all Allied resources to be invested in the worst place in the world to fight Germans, hundreds of miles away, with the Alps between you.
It's a bit
from
of a
the
bloodbath
Ruhr.
potentially, isn't it?
And the interesting thing is, he always pushed this soft underbelly idea. It wasn't a soft underbelly. The only place that fitted that, the only part of Nazi-occupied southern Europe that was a soft underbelly was around southern France, near Cannes, Saint-Tropez and all that, Marseille, because that's where the Rhone River feeds in there. That's nice and flat. And that's where the Americans wanted to land. Churchill opposed that. So the one part of southern Europe that was a soft underbelly,
that fit with the plan he was pushing.
He objected to it mainly because once resources were invested there, that would doubly confirm France as the decisive theatre and take energy, attention, resources away from what he wanted to be the decisive theatre, southeastern Europe, the Balkans.
What did the sort of... I mean, it sounds like he was a bit of a shite military strategist.
Doesn't he? Aye.
To put it to a better way.
Look, stop sitting on the fence there.
Aye. But what did the British military hierarchy and like the generals and the people that were in charge of like the army and the navy, what did they think about what he was planning and doing at that point in time?
Well, the Britain's senior military officer was, he became Field Marshal Alan Brooke, General Sir Alan Brooke. He took over as the dominant figure and the Chief of Staff. Basically, the British Chiefs of Staff is the military head of the Navy, the Air Force and the Army. And he became the dominant figure from late 41 when he was appointed to it onwards. By and large, he was also very hostile and anxious about a landing in northwestern Europe. I mean, I have to put a bit of context here. There were some legitimate reasons for maybe being a country like Britain have been a bit anxious about returning to a place where in 1914-18 there'd been mass slaughter.
Yeah.
There was an anxiety which I think has some justification to it.
And there wasn't a public appetite for the type of scale invasion
There
necessarily.
was a fear that if D-Day, Normandy, Overlord hadn't gone well, would we get bogged down in a repeat of that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's reasonable enough. I mean, you have to bear in mind, if you're the Minister of Defence or the Chief, you've got the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, young men mainly, and young women as well. If you screw up, there could be mass casualties, and there'd been mass casualties in the First World War, and they didn't. So that made them a bit anxious, and also they'd get their arse felt in Dunkirk. They'd been kicked out of there already.
There's a number of quite high-profile
So there was no rush. And also, I think the thing that's not widely acknowledged was the very low opinion that people at Churchill and some of his leading advisors had of the British Army.
Yeah.
There was this amazing, partly justified respect of, German force of arms and a denigration among some people, not all, of what, the British Army or the Anglo-American armies could do. I mean, there's one occasion where Churchill said to General Marshall, the American Army Chief of Staff, one German division is equal to 2.5 American divisions. And Marshall's like, I don't want to ever hear that crap again.
Yeah. But when you look at the success of things like Blitzkrieg and all the rest of it as they swept across Europe, and when you compare it to the military austerity that Britain had faced, as you described, I think that's no unreasonable. I mean, they were horrible bastards, the Nazis, but if you look at it in purely how effective some of their military tactics were, I can get why the hierarchy of British military were probably somewhat reluctant to engage them in those kind of terms, because, as you say, there was legitimate concerns about how effective they were going to be against them.
So the things that were legitimate concerns was there could be another repeat of World War One, a horrible bloodbath with hundreds of thousands, 1 million dead. There was also grave doubts about the ability of Anglo-American armies to actually beat the Germans in a major decisive engagement. But the thing that's completely overlooked, which I think is less justifiable, is Churchill's imperial obsession. He, along with these two other things that are kind of reasonable and you can understand, was his desire to prioritise Britain's imperial position and its easy access to Middle Eastern oil. That's often excluded from the narrative. And I've tried to introduce it in a spirit of inclusion.
And also trying to push naval engagement in Asia and stuff like that as well at a time when resources were sparse, and that was a crazy idea.
That I think gives credence to what I'm arguing. Before going on to that, I would say that not every senior British military figure shared Churchill's views. Like Montgomery, he was the ground forces. I mean, he took over the planning of D-Day. He was a meticulous planner. He gave the right job to the right guy, and that's one of the reasons why, on the whole, D-Day Overlord was a huge success. He had spent some time fighting in southern Italy and just thought, this is nightmare. This is the worst place in the world to fight, because all the Germans have to do is blow up a bridge and we're fucked. We're delayed for several days or weeks.
Where modern armies have encountered the same thing in Afghanistan.
He was very keen and committed to securing military success in northwestern Europe. So I don't want to say every British senior military figure opposed it. Bomber Harris certainly did. He was dreading the immolation of our youth in the mud of Flanders again, or a repeat of Dunkirk, and that quote from him's in the book. So a lot of them did have doubts over it. People at Montgomery and some others didn't. And it was because they were so committed to making D-Day a success that it was a success. They put heart and soul into organising it brilliantly. And, I mean, there's question marks over Montgomery as what sort of personality he was, but in some ways he was like far ahead of, military thinking. For example, there was one, when Churchill was looking at all the troops that were going to be involved in Overlord, he was like, dentists? Why have we got dentists, including the army? And he wrote a note to Montgomery, and Montgomery just wrote back very promptly. It says, Prime Minister, a soldier with toothache is of no use to me. So
it's a pretty rudimentary understanding of how people operate.
Absolutely. Whereas Churchill was obsessed with bayonets. The thing that gave an army at that time the edge was being able to move your troops about quickly.
Yes.
You need trucks. And he would be dismissive of truck chauffeurs. Why have we got so many chauffeurs? He had this old idea in many ways of like people with bayonets on
their red coats.
So after that digression, if you look at what he was wanting in Asia and the Pacific, once that became an important issue for Britain from the spring of 1944 onwards, he was doing the same thing. The Americans had the right idea. They knew that the war would end quickly and with the right result through their island hopping campaign aimed at getting to Japan's home islands as quickly as possible.
Yep.
Churchill opposed that. His emphasis was on regaining our imperial possessions in Singapore and Malaya. So whereas the Americans proposed a Pacific strategy aimed directly at Japan, he was championing a Bay of Bengal strategy.
This is another one.
Going from India into Sumatra and then from Sumatra into Malaya, because it was important to our prestige to show these brown-skinned people that, although we'd been kicked out 3 or 4 years earlier, we were now kicking the Japanese out, so we're the top dog, respect us. But again, if you look, that's like 1,300 miles away from Japan. Yep. It would not have accelerated the end of the war. It would have strengthened Britain's empire.
And like outrageous impenetrable jungle again. It's an absolute, like the Mediterranean strategy. Like, had you actually sent bodies in there and the type of, volumes that we were talking about, again, it would have just been a catastrophic bloodbath.
Malaya could have been, had British and American resources been invested in it. Again, that could have been a terrible bloodbath. Again, to their credit, and again, just to show that, it wasn't everybody wasn't thinking the same way. The Chiefs of Staff in the spring of 1944 had a big standoff with Churchill, and even on a couple of occasions talked about resignation.
Yeah.
Because this Bay of Bengal strategy that he was proposing was militarily shite. It was obsessed with Britain regaining rubber plantations and tin mines in Malaya and Singapore. It wouldn't bring about the rapid defeat of Japan.
Yeah.
So there was a big standoff in the spring of 1944, which in the usual British way, well, basically, as it was reaching a critical point, the Americans intervened and backed up. Roosevelt and his Chiefs of Staff supported the British Chiefs of Staff. So Churchill was outnumbered again.
So they basically ganged up on Churchill?
With the correct military strategy. Yep. Churchill was forced to concede and grudgingly advocate, Myanmar, Burma became an increasing focus. And by the time of the next big Allied conferences in September came round, he said, Oh no, we'd be quite happy for the Royal Navy to participate in action against Japan's home islands. But that's he was forced by circumstance and overwhelming numbers to change his strategy. His strategy would have been a bloodbath in Malaya, to almost certainly to regain our empire. It wouldn't have accelerated the defeat of Japan.
So we've got two instances here where the guy who is in our time remembered as the greatest Briton and master tactician.
Did they not win something at the turn of the millennium?
The
man of the millennium.
Dude, there was a scientific poll on the BBC. People know clearly and unambiguously identified him as the greatest ever Briton. So,
but towards the end of the war, we've got him wrong in Europe, trying to lead troops into a bloodbath in the Alps and beyond to essentially try and prioritise British interests over the ending of the war. And now we've also got in the sort of Pacific and Asian regions the same thing happening, where to the point where his own military hierarchy have to and it was very British, wasn't it? Because there was a series of quite sort of letters back and forth.
Yeah.
Even though there was a pressing thing happening that needed to be decided, and we needed to press forward and end the war as quickly as possible. This was them bouncing quite coarse letters back and forward to each other over a period of time before then essentially going to the Americans and being like, help us sort this guy out. So the mythology is something that is really jumping out at me, because the book paints quite a bleak picture of somebody who is at best probably quite ineffective, and at worst probably in some cases pretty incompetent. How have we got to the point where he's remembered in such glowing terms when, again, we have an alcoholic, manic depressive, incompetent,
I think we have to look at, the British public in the summer of 1945, they weren't buying any mythology. This was the man who had supposedly led us to victory, and they kicked him out.
Yeah.
So they were sorry, they were sussed. It was only, I think in the period after that, there was a certain amount of revisionism. As Britain was forced to give away its imperial ill-gotten gains, there was a certain, I'm sure we've all seen them, all those black and white movies from the 50s with John Mills and Kenneth More, stressing, the plucky little British underdog and stuff like that. So, every country, every individual has its myths that, that usually paint us as the good guy. When I went through a bit of a divorce, anybody going through a divorce usually finds it easy to see how reasonable they are,
and how unreasonable.
And we tend to burnish our own good stuff, and we're maybe we don't want to fully acknowledge our shortcomings. Britain as a country is not exempt from that. Plus the fact, just because of the freakish geographical accent of the Channel, we haven't been militarily invaded for a millennium, since 1066. So we've got a ruling elite, in the continent, the ruling elite was getting continually discredited because they would lose a war, then they would win the next one, then they would lose it. And they were always getting overthrown and changing. Whereas we've had the same bunch of blood-sucking parasites in power for a millennium. And they've just, they've got the whole, the media, culture, education is all geared up to reinforce this hegemonic idea that they're right, we're wonderful, we are the greatest country on earth, our army is the best in the world, and people have lost the ability, well, I don't want to generalise, but some people accept that uncritically. And there's obviously, I think, fortunately in Scotland, there's a critical mass of people who look in that a certain level of scepticism and have a different vision of how life can be.
We've had conversations with people about why that is, because it seems to have be like almost like a unfortunate sort of set of circumstances between the deindustrialisation of which Scotland really relied on its industry, Thatcher, who imposed things on Scotland that had drove people to like protest, in the 80s, and then coming up to like sort of Blair, Brown being the sort of hope that we thought that we all needed and wanted, and then that being a clusterfuck, and then the independence referendum where the media clearly turned on what seemed like the Yes movement and tried to paint it as something it
notions
wasn't.
of partiality.
And because we were in it, we could see it for what it was. I mean, the thing that comes to mind when I talk about that is what was the guy that was the head of Scottish Labour? The fucking Muppet. Jim Murphy down at St. Square, where what the Daily Mail and the Sun made look like a gang of people screaming in his face, but if you were actually there was like 3 guys standing in front of him. But it was just the clever camera angle, really. Actually, that's what went on, and we've been able to see that. So now we're very sceptical when it comes to like the British media and stuff, and that seems to be the sort of conclusion that we've been part of being painted as something different over the sort of last 30, 40 years, where some of the nations woke up to it, but now we're starting to see like this sort of doubling down on unionism and what it means to be British by another sort of section, and it's part of like identity almost.
Well, they're very anxious and afraid now, and I think if you're that sort of person from the ruling British elite, if Scotland breaks away, you're no longer Great Britain, really. No. Or if Northern Ireland changes its constitutional arrangements, I mean, those two things are going to impact on each other.
Yeah.
If there's going to be a border poll in Ireland in the next 5 years, as Sinn Féin are suggesting is going to be a big priority for them, and it does lead to a reunification of Ireland, that'll have a big impact on Scotland, and vice versa. If Scotland, elects to reassert its sovereignty, that's going to have a big effect.
They're the last 2 holdouts, really, aren't they?
So at the end of the day, it's going to be very difficult. It'll just be England, maybe with Wales, but it'll eventually free itself as well. It won't be Great Britain. They'll not be able to say, all these bloody lazy Great British Bake Off and all that. I hate these things. It's fucking laziness from all these morons that run, the TV industry. Laziness and stupidity, and I look forward to that being challenged. And it's not a business to talk about other countries, but I want Scotland to choose its own path.
Yeah,
a different path. We're not perfect. We're not going to create utopia, but every individual should run their own life.
Absolutely. So
they can learn from their mistakes and profit from their good decisions. And every country that sees itself as a country should have the same right. And the sooner we get to establishing that right to choose, the better. And I think Scotland's long-term future will be better when we govern ourselves.
Absolutely.
100%. No country wants to be governed by... I mean, I've got lovely neighbours. Do I want them telling me what I should have for my dinner, what clothes I should wear? No. I'll do that, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I've got hundreds... I'm going down to visit friends in Oxford and Cambridge this year.
Yep.
I've consumed massive amounts of brilliant culture that originated in England from the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, the Sex Pistols, Pulp. The Detectorists, a fantastic TV series that embodies wonderful things about England and what it can give the world. I love many things about England.
Absolutely.
But I don't want them deciding our economic and social priorities.
Something that really resonated there was saying that, like, learning from your mistakes. And if we continue to, for lack of a better phrase, whitewash the mistakes that have been made in the past through education systems. I mean, my history,
through my book.
Yeah, but well, your book's part of breaking that sort of notion. I mean, my history lessons were trench warfare, winning the Great War, and beating Hitler. That was it. There was absolutely zero
context.
Yeah, nothing about the empire, nothing about massacres or famine, or nothing about Ireland at all. It was all just basically like, since 1900, look how great we've become.
Even this week, if you look at what's went on with the recent Irish election and the just absolute ridiculous confusion that it's caused to hear as people try to understand like their electoral process and stuff like that. Like, these guys are 12 miles across the water for us. Like, how the fuck do we not understand who they are and what their systems are about? And it's because it is that Britain first mentality. Like, I think as we talk about like how constitutions and, you know, how we're ruled and stuff like that, I find that after having read through the book, the first time that the Boris Johnson's comparisons of himself with Churchill are actually valid, because as much as he, references Churchill an awful lot, I've always thought to myself, you're a fucking cheeky bastard, because you're incompetent as fuck. Like, how the fuck? I mean, I didn't agree with everything Churchill, had a basic understanding of some stuff, but like, that I'm going, that is a deeply unfair comparison, because that guy actually achieved shit, and you're just an absolute cunt. But like, now having read the book and realising that Churchill was often incompetent, often ill-informed, and, often chasing the wrong thing at the wrong time, like, I probably think the Boris Johnson comparison is probably pretty fair.
Yeah, but do you think that Boris understands?
No,
I've read his book, The Churchill Factor, and it's just lazy journalism, just cherry picking, certain things. Well, my view is, in fact, I'm certainly going to send a copy of my book to Churchill's grandson, Nicholas Soames, to see if I can get a nice endorsement from him. I might send it to Boris as well, because the very last chapter is called, it summarises Churchill's top 10 military blunders.
Yep.
And it's called Captain Mannering in Downing Street.
I like
because I think, I love Dad's Army for a whole host of reasons. I think there's a lot of overlap in many ways between Churchill and Mannering.
Mm-hmm.
The phrase that Mannering would use when Jones was coming up with weird ideas is going into the realms of fantasy, and I think Churchill was going into the realms of fantasy in many occasions. Again, there's a quote from, he was an American statesman, Averell Harriman. He quotes Hastings Ismay, who was actually Churchill's chief of staff, and he basically, Ismay says, Churchill's, a great strategist. He can have one division in action in 3 different places at once. So I think he had, in many ways, I think he, all the, like Hitler, amateur strategists that hadn't really studied it, I think he had a sort of view of warfare where, it was like you could move these things about on a board and they just did what you wanted them
risk.
to. And you didn't take into account certain things like the time of year, weather, and all that. And logistics. And, that quote about, why are there dentists,
that's exactly what I was thinking about that. Things
and,
like human nature.
Describing, truck drivers, chauffeurs as if they've got no use. But, if you don't, until you've got Antwerp as a functioning port, you've got a very long drive from Normandy to the German border. You need, it was called the Red Ball Express. You need this never-ending convoy of trucks bringing fuel and food and ammunition and reinforcements up to the front. Your chauffeurs, your truck drivers were absolutely vital to military success. And similarly, that was a big reason, one of the big reasons the Americans wanted to have the invasion of Southern Europe, Operation Dragoon, was because it would give them access to 2 big ports, Marseille and Toulon, and also whereas the Allied air forces had bombed the hell out of the rail network in northwestern Europe, they hadn't done anything to southern Europe. So you had all these nice rail lines that were still functioning. So you could, and until Antwerp became operational again in late November or December 1944, bearing in mind troops landed in June. About 40% of the supplies going into the Anglo-American armies in Europe at that point were coming through southern Europe. So it was absolutely vital to our success.
Wow.
And interestingly, of course, Churchill opposed the operation that gave us access to Marseille, Toulon, and the rail network of southern France.
100% record here. I just objecting now against everything that needs to happen.
So yes, so I start off with Churchill. The book opens with Churchill sort of been born, and I cover his first 20 years in about a page or so, and I thought it would be appropriate to bookend the book by going back to Churchill. So top 10 military blunders or wrong decisions or wrong emphases, because he was obviously overruled in certain things. And yes, completely gratuitous and offensive, but very accurate and pertinent comparison to George Mannering
Aye.
of the Walmington Sea Home Guard platoon. Brave, active, lot of self-belief, want to defend Britain. Well, that's what Churchill and Mannering had in common. But, you know, whereas Sergeant Wilson would, when he saw some crackpot idea of Mannering's, would say, "Do you think that's wise, sir?" Well, fortunately, throughout the war, Stalin and Roosevelt were saying the same thing to Churchill.
They're basically the home guard.
In a slightly more forceful way.
Yeah.
Because they were much bigger military, economic and industrial powers. And at the end of the day, Britain was overwhelmed. We were forced and coerced into doing the right thing militarily to bring the war in Western Europe and Europe as a whole to an end in the best possible way. Churchill didn't want to do that. He wanted us to faff about in the Balkans, southeastern Europe, because it suited the British Empire and easy access to oil. So one of the earlier titles for the book was, well, went through a few titles. One was Imperial Obsession. Another title was Empire and Oil. That's what really fueled him. And it becomes really sharp, into sharper relief after the great Soviet victory at the Battle of Kursk. Because then we could pick and choose. Up until that point, we had to fight in places that the Germans had started aggro. After that, you know, and the Americans pointed this out in a paper saying, now we can choose where we want to go. And they went where they were gung-ho for the correct military option, Northwestern Europe. Churchill and his senior advisors wanted to faff about in southeastern Europe, which would have been a disaster had they not been overruled. So that's why I'm hoping for massive sales in America.
I mean,
because although it slags off Churchill, it does say that the Americans had the right idea.
I genuinely like reading the book. It was a great read, but just sitting and chatting, I'm thinking like, this is the type of shit that Netflix are just all about. Like the sort of actual historically accurate documentary where they dramatise it a wee bit, but they also have historians sort of like talking. And I think I genuinely think that it's tailor made for that type of thing. I mean, obviously it's been very, very well researched, which is a credit to yourself.
Absolutely.
I mean, ridiculously well researched.
Aye.
And I mean, I think that if it gets the right backing, as we know, like things like this need the right backing.
That's why I'm here, guys.
Yeah, I mean, this is like in advance of like any sort of release, but if it gets the right backing and the right thing, I mean, it could be something that gets picked up for something.
I know. I thoroughly enjoyed my read there.
The content has been created. From now on, it's all marketing, distribution and sales, which is a different ball game. So I did at one point have a respected British publisher interested in it. And then after I signed the contract and sent it back to them, they changed their mind, and I've been given a couple of explanations as to why that was. So I'm starting off by self-publishing, which, you know, it's kind of compelling me to be true to my punky DIY ideals.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I'm quite looking forward to, you know, doing things like this and, you know, bumping my gums and, you know, being out there and hustling it and getting it on Amazon and going to lots of wee meetings and word of mouth and seeing what happens.
See what kind of response you get for Churchill's grandson.
I was going to say, in Brexit Britain, like, have you got any concerns about, you know, it being un-British? You know, I'm not. I don't want to be British. American thing, you know.
I don't want to be British. I want to be Scotland to be a sovereign, independent state, unambiguously, and a republic. So, I think the whole Brexit thing. I think the chickens will come home to roost in that. I think the whole object of that is to turn us into just like a mini-me version of the United States, you know, just rampant neoliberalism, which is never good for working class people, the people who actually generate the wealth. It's going to mean a tremendous erosion of workers' rights. You know, the public sector, we're going backwards, and we already have started going backwards. Diseases that we thought had vanished,
of course,
are coming back.
Yeah.
Food banks are coming back. I mean, like my town of Greenock, when I was growing up as a wee boy in the 60s and 70s, it had like 73,000 people, shipyards, engineering works, and the sugar refinery where my dad worked, all wiped out. And the population has gone down to about 42,000.
No.
Almost halved. They drove out the employment and the making of things and introduced heroin. And they took away the hope that through historical accident, I was able, and people of my generation had all these fantastic opportunities. Going to Cambridge University on a grant, big debts. That was one of the big things that I think was more prevalent back in my childhood, this idea of hope and things gradually getting better, and it's been replaced by a system in which anxiety, neuroses, and doubt and insecurity thrives. They talk about people, we want everybody to own their own home, but we're going to undermine security of employment.
Yeah.
How do you get a mortgage if you're on a 0 hours contract?
Yeah, exactly.
It's all these things, sadly, will come home to roost. People think, Brexit is done.
Mm-hmm.
It's not been
It's
done.
not even started, really, has it?
I was meaning more in terms of people's attitude about, this, for the type of person who is viciously Brexit or pro-Brexit, a perceived attack on somebody like Churchill, is that something that you're concerned about in the current climate?
I suppose I should be, but I can't, having stumbled across the truth accidentally because a quote in this book, Basil Littlehart's History of the Second World War, which was a whole starting point for all this, I just had to pursue what I believe to be the truth to its logical conclusion, backed up by evidence.
Yep.
If somebody wants to criticise a book and they've got a really sexy, intelligent, inspiring quote and it's based on some evidence and analysis, cool.
Okay.
If it's just name calling, well,
get to fuck with it.
That'll be a new experience for me. Actually having attention paid to me. So I don't know how. Maybe if I come back in 2 years' time, I'll be a coke-addled wreck.
Well, let's hope not.
Looking forward to rehab. Who knows? You can never predict. As William Goldman, the American, screenwriter, says, nobody knows nothing. In terms of what's going to be a success, you can have a hot director, 3 bankable stars, a brilliant script, make a good film, and it stiffs.
Yeah.
You can never predict how people are going to respond.
Absolutely.
Look at Iggy Pop, widely revered, the godfather of punk. The first 3 Stooges albums tanked. No great commercial sale. He was too far ahead of the curve, basically. So I'm in it for posterity, the long run. I'm a historian. I don't think in terms of just, the short term. I think in epochs and eons and millennia as well as the short term. So I will be vindicated in the long run.
Fair enough.
I do believe that through trial and error we'll move as a society to a better place. Because if you don't believe that, why would you? Why get out of bed in the morning?
That's exactly it.
But I think the history of the 20th century shows us that the only time good things happen to working class people is after a successful war with Germany. Right? After 1918 Representation of the People Act, hundreds of thousands of us slaughtered in the First World War. And we get the right to vote.
Yeah.
And I think they were obviously afraid of what happened in Russia, the revolution.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's give them the vote and stave off any more militant thing. After the Second World War, welfare state, government intervention.
Homes for heroes, etc.
Etc. So it's a sad fact that we may have to go through a comparable crisis before we get a good place again. Because, the post-war consensus, governed Britain from 45 to the late 70s, 3 decades. And then it's been replaced by neoliberalism, which the Blair Brown government were guilty of as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were like, the city can do whatever it wants. We're not going to monitor them as long as we're getting enough tax revenue to fund a few wee things, and share the crumbs a wee bit better. And that was proved wrong because it went to pot in 2008. So hopefully it would be nice to think we could evolve without having these, spasms of chaos and mass slaughter.
It seems to be the way of things, but isn't it, is that leads to change. But I'm very hopeful that the next generation of people are coming up in the information age with the internet, if it can be used appropriately rather than like a big like fucking Twitter just seems to be like a mad riot just now. But once we can get that to calm down and we can actually share the information, I think that, well, I hope that we can come out the other side of this and actually look at what has actually happened the last 200 years so that we can make the next 200 better for everybody rather than just for a very small percentage of people that still seem to have.
We have to, because we're moving towards a world in which we'll not be able to breathe the air or drink the water or walk in the sunshine. It's not going to be much worth living if you can't, if the water's all toxic and the sun gives you cancer and the air gives you, lung disease. All this mad lust for material wealth has got to change.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the big challenge. My own view is there's lots of things can be done. I think we need a major overhaul of the education system, because this idea of 30 kids studying things at times when this authority figure tells them and things they're not interested in, that just sets you up to be passive, when you go to work.
Absolutely.
So
we need rather than people.
Yeah, passive workers who accept things uncritically. They just get used to it. It's initially it's the teacher that's the authority figure, and then it becomes the boss.
I will stop
and
teaching people how to think.
You become alienated from yourself.
You started teaching them what to think rather than how to think.
Yes, and I think was it Mary Blatt or Caitlin Moran basically said, we need an education system that develops young people who will create jobs that don't currently exist now.
Yes.
That level of innovative, imaginative work. So we need to give kids more choice about, what they study and start them experiencing some real freedom and accepting responsibility at an early age. And that's why, if I was, I wouldn't want to get into politics or be the First Minister, and I'd maybe be tempted with the education portfolio. I think we should be putting so much more money into that and have class sizes of 10 to 12 where, teachers should be getting into school looking forward to it every day.
Yeah.
Because passing on knowledge and understanding and enlightenment is a fantastic buzz.
Mm-hmm.
And we could have a school system like that if the lives and potential of working class people were treated with the respect.
I think as well, if we had those smaller classes and retooling of how we approach the educational system, maybe content such as yours wouldn't be so much a surprise to so many people, because people would have had a wider, more rounded understanding of
they'd
the
be
actual
more used to
historical context
independent
of things.
critical thinking, and also think, if schools are riven with bullying and horrible things, it's because kids. It's a horrible system.
Yeah.
Kids
not nice
lash out. They don't like it, or they've got problems at home, so it creates problems at school. But, the school I went to, it was okay in many regards, but 1,200 people—that's too big, man.
Yeah.
It needs to be more human size. So I would prioritise investing in a revolution in the education system. But that's the sort of thing that you plant the seeds and the fruit, the good stuff would come, 20 years down the line.
Involves patience.
And politicians are largely governed by a very short-term
electoral 4-year cycle.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've had an amazing conversation. It's been
you've stayed awake. That's a new experience for me.
Absolutely.
The hysterically Ken me is extremely happy.
Absolutely, man. I think we could have just kept going. But I mean, thanks for coming in and talking to us. Thanks for the copy of the book as well. I think I'm probably going to just get it to people.
Aye.
So just people that
undercut my sale.
No, not at all. I would always when I give people, if it's like music, if I listen to something on Spotify or Apple Music and I genuinely love it, I'll buy it. in whatever way, maybe just even a 49p MP3.
Oh,
So I would say to people, if you read this book and you enjoy it when it comes out commercially, go and fucking buy it, because I'm going to do that as well. I'm going to get the final copy of it. So thanks for the copy of the book. I'm going to share it with people. Thanks for coming in. It's been a ridiculously informative conversation, but I think that the links between how the Second and the First World War are viewed and how we live today is actually still quite daunting and scary for me, that we still hark back to a time like nearly 100 years ago and see that as some kind of fucking example of how we should live in a completely different world.
That whole notion that we'll be alright going forward with Brexit because we won the World War. And you're like, well, hold on a minute. Did we? I mean, and if we did, was it as a result of anything we actually did? You know what I mean?
Not with 80 or 90% of German casualties occurring in the Eastern Front.
Yeah.
You know, we
Absolutely.
finished it off.
I suppose we could do another podcast with asking the question, did Britain win the war?
We were on the winning side.
Yes. Yeah. Aye, but did we actually?
Pretty sure I already covered this on the blog, but anyway.
Again,
nice to see you.
Thanks very much.
No, it's been my pleasure. Been able to bump my gums about something that I've invested so much bloody time in.
And it shows. It really does.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
I made a promise to whom will not to you, so stop the party. I tried to reconcile